for joining. A lot going on in Washington right now, so I want to give you an overview and get to your questions as quickly as possible. But basically, we've had about 3 months since I was sworn in. Well, about 4 months actually, and in those 4 months, we've gone from insurrection to infrastructure, which I think is a good sign of progress from one of the lowest points in the recent history of our country to a moment when I feel like we have a lot of opportunity to do some good. In the meantime, we passed and enacted a really groundbreaking piece of legislation to deal with the COVID crisis, the American Rescue Plan, and I think you all know many of the key features of that bill, from the stimulus checks to extending unemployment and small business help and help for our struggling restaurants and for our mass transit systems, so that we'll still have NJ Transit when we start commuting back to New York again. But a couple of other aspects of that bill I keep honing in on because I think I'm not sure if the significance is fully sunk in. One is a $3,000 per child tax credit, which is fully refundable, $3,600 actually for a child under the age of 6, for families making up to $150,000 a year. We've estimated that that will cut child poverty in America in half. And a very significant change to the Affordable Care Act that basically caps the monthly premiums that folks on the individual marketplace are paying to 8% of their income. I ran for Congress on a pledge to lower healthcare costs in 2018. We've just done it in a dramatic way. The average middle-class family in New Jersey will save hundreds of dollars because of this change per month. That's hundreds of dollars per month. And that's going to be available in New Jersey starting in the coming days, as soon as our state exchange website fully processes the change. And we will obviously reach out to everybody the moment that has happened. So that's the American Rescue Plan. It was immediate relief to try to get us through the next few weeks of this crisis, and until hopefully we can look at COVID in the rearview mirror, getting more shots into more arms more quickly, obviously, as part of that deal. And now we're on to something much more significant and much more fundamental. The next piece of legislation that we will be taking up will be some version of President Biden's infrastructure plan, what he calls his American Jobs Plan. And here's what's going on in terms of that bill. We have decades of unmet, put off, delayed needs in this country to fix our roads, our railroads, our ports, our airports, our water infrastructure, water pipes that are supposed to deliver fresh drinking water to all of our homes, our electrical infrastructure. And on top of that, a crying need to stimulate the economy by creating jobs to get us fully, finally, completely out of the economic crisis of the last year. So what this bill will do is exactly that. It will repair over 20,000 miles of roads in America, over 10,000 bridges. A lot of them will be in the state of New Jersey. Our ports, our airports. It will replace every single lead drinking water pipe in America. That's not just a need in Flint, Michigan. We've got a lot of lead pipes in the state of New Jersey that are a threat to the health of our kids. We're an old state with old infrastructure. We will benefit tremendously from that. We will be setting aside money in this bill specifically for large transportation projects that are of regional or national significance, that are too big to be paid for by the normal grant programs that the Department of Transportation runs. Guess what we're talking about there? The Gateway Project, the Hudson River Tunnel. That's going to be funded by this bill. And on top of that, on top of fixing all the stuff that needs to be fixed and giving our country the 21st century infrastructure that we need, that we deserve, that will make us proud of what America can build again. There's something even more fundamental about this bill, and that is that we will be spending the money in a way that is designed to accelerate our country's transition from fossil fuels to clean energy. It's the most significant, predictable economic transformation in modern history. For transportation, it's like building the Transcontinental Railroad or the Erie Canal or the interstate highway system in the 1950s. All of those were new forms of infrastructure that totally transformed the way we get around and the foundations of our economy. This is happening, whether we want it to or not, and we should want it to, because climate change is looming. But it's happening one way or another. And the question before us is, do we want the United States of America to lead the world in making this transition? Do we want American companies, American factories, American workers, American scientists to be out in front in mastering and marketing the technologies of clean energy, particularly in transportation? Or do we want China or somebody else to do that? For me, the answer is pretty darn clear. I want America to do that, and I want New Jersey to be leading the United States in that effort. And so that's what this bill does by heavily investing in electric vehicles, not just cars, but trucks and buses, in upgrading our national electrical grid so that we are delivering enough electricity to be able to power all those vehicles and all the other things that will hopefully be running on electricity generated by wind and solar power in the decades to come. And all of this, by the way, creates incredibly good, high-paying union jobs. About half of the jobs that will be created by this bill will be available to folks without a college degree. So that's what we aim to do here. What we're trying to achieve is something that Americans have done repeatedly at moments of crisis in our history. The Great Depression led to the New Deal, Social Security, a whole new relationship between our government and our people. The Second World War, all of the trauma, all of the loss in that conflict spurred us after the war to create the United Nations, to build a global system to defend human rights and to prevent war. The Cold War, in which we were almost annihilated, spurred us to build the interstate highway system, to pass the civil rights legislation, to put a man on the moon. Those were all good things to do. We needed the pressure of crisis to spur us to do them. And now we've been through hell in the last year. We lost more Americans than we lost in World War I and World War II combined. What a shame, what a waste it would be if we did not come out of that motivated to do something big and bold, to restart and transform our economy and make this country the leader in this historic transition. It's that kind of moment, once in a generation, where we have that kind of opportunity. So that's my inspiration over the next few months, and what I'll be working on, particularly in my role as a member of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. Tons of other issues on my plate, and I know on your minds as well. So I'll stop here and invite you all, as always, to share your comments with me and your questions, whether it's on something I already raised or something completely different. I look forward to addressing whatever is on your mind. So thank you, Nari, and let's go to the questions.
Great, thanks, Tom. We are going to start with a few frequently asked questions that were submitted beforehand, and after that, we will go into live questions. If your pre-submitted question was not answered during the FAQ portion, please ask again using the chat feature for it to be answered live by Tom today. Just a reminder, if you would like to ask a live question, please first use the chat feature at the bottom of your screen to submit your question, and I will add you to the list. I will also let you know when you are next up in line to ask your question. Now would be a great time to start submitting those as well. But for our first FAQ, Tom, you touched on this a little bit, but how is funding for the Gateway Tunnel coming along?
It's going to be coming. I'm pretty confident. So to build the Gateway project, we need two things basically. We need money and we need approval. The first stage of the project, the Portal Bridge, railway bridge that you cross before you get to the tunnel, just as vital, by the way. We got both the money and the approval last year. We had to fight through a lot of resistance from the previous administration, but we got that, and work should begin on that relatively soon. The tunnel, which is the bigger stage of the project, that was resisted all the way to the final day of the last administration. Biden's in there now, Pete Buttigieg at Department of Transportation. We've been talking to them. I've spoken to Buttigieg about this a couple of times, and they are totally on board with doing the tunnel. And so we've given them a checklist of basically administrative steps that have to be taken so that we can get to the funding and building stage of the project. And they are going through that meticulously. The next step is getting an environmental impact statement out. That was basically buried for 2 or 3 years by the last administration. They had to go back to the state of New Jersey for a few additional details because it was delayed so long. But Secretary Buttigieg promised me it would be done by the end of the second quarter of this year, so basically the end of the spring. Next on funding, as I mentioned, the American Jobs Plan, the infrastructure bill we are considering, will absolutely contain funding for projects like Gateway. We can't name a specific project of that size in the bill. We will be able to earmark funding for much smaller projects in my district, and I'll be doing that. But for really big ones like this, what we're doing is creating basically a separate pool of funding for projects of national significance, as we call them. And that program is basically designed to fund things like Gateway. There are several others around the country that probably would qualify as well. So nothing's done until it's done, but the resistance is no longer there. Everyone's doing what they're supposed to be doing, and I will stay on this until it is signed, sealed, and delivered, and we will have the fast, smooth ride to New York that everybody deserves. 1-seat ride for the Raritan Valley line, greater capacity. It'll be transformative. So stay tuned. Keep asking me. I'll keep on it.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks.
All right, after this question, we will begin live questioning. Remember to use the chat feature at the bottom of your screen to submit your question to Tom. We have questions rolling in already, so make sure you get those submitted to me very soon as well. All right, Tom, for your next FAQ, is there any chance we are going to see the SALT cap raised?
I hope so. I've been very annoying on SALT in the last couple of weeks, and put out a letter that was signed by 7 or 8 of my House Democratic colleagues, in which what it basically said was that we're not going to allow the passage of any bill that meaningfully affects our constituents' taxes. So basically anything that might raise individual rates at any income level, unless that bill addresses the SALT cap issue. So I love Biden's infrastructure bill, but once we start getting into taxes to pay for any of this, or for the next bill that he has said he will be proposing, which will deal with things like education, student loans, healthcare, workforce development, then I can't vote for a bill that raises our taxes without dealing with SALT. And right now, at least, there are enough of us in the House to be able to block a bill on that basis. So we have some leverage. So that's, that's not a guarantee of success. Our chances of success will be the greatest the more of this broader agenda is actually moving through the House and Senate. Obviously, if things get completely bottled up in the Senate, we'll probably have a chance to talk about filibusters and Joe Manchin and all of that complicated stuff. But the more is moving, then the more leverage I have to demand that we address SALT. And there are different ways to address it. I'd like to see it fully restored, because I think as a matter of principle, the federal government should not be taking money that another government has already taken that we've never seen, right? It's taken out of our paycheck, and yet it's taxed a second time. So it makes no sense. That's just a principle that's been in the tax code since we've had an income tax, and it was taken away in 2017. But if there's another way to provide relief to folks, particularly those who need it the most. I'm thinking of that young couple buying their first home. I'm thinking of a retired couple who doesn't want to move out of Jersey. You want to stay closer to your grandkids, but you're on a fixed income. Anything that will help folks like that with the added burden that the SALT cap created, I'm open to, and hope that we will have an opportunity to use that leverage that a handful of us have on this. Thanks.
Thanks, Tom. We are now going to begin our live Q&A portion. Again, please use the chat feature at the bottom of your screen to ask a live question to Tom. When you do so, please include your name and the town you are from. That will help us mitigate many people who might have a similar name as well. We want to make sure we answer as many questions as we can. All right, first up, we have John from Garwood. John, can you hear us?
I can indeed. Thank you. Good afternoon, Tom.
Hey, John.
You're a voice of reason in Congress, and I'm willing to bet if anyone had asked you, you would have been one of the voices advocating Congress not intervene in Iowa's 2nd District. I just kind of know that. I don't want you to say anything about it, but I think you see both sides of many of these issues. And in the past, you've demonstrated your unwillingness to partner with members from across the aisle on legislation. And you've noted that bipartisanship takes time and effort. But on the infrastructure bill and the other bills, I'm not encouraged by what I've seen so far in this Congress. And I want to use H.R. 1 as an example. H.R. 1 was introduced on January the 4th and went through the process with 222 Democratic co-sponsors and not a single Republican. That was less than 24 hours after the new Congress was seated. So I don't know where the time and effort is being put in an example like that. So I'm begging that we follow the lead of Joe Manchin, and that we break this cycle that we're in. And I think the infrastructure bill gives us a great opportunity. I get it. We have to look backward, but we also have to look forward. And I think some of our Republican friends are not looking forward in terms of our definition of infrastructure. I get it, but I think enough of them can be won over by the things that are popular. So where does this, who's going to take the first step in this, and what can you do to help crack this code?
Yeah, so we're moving on 2 separate tracks at once. I mean, we are putting together, which I think is appropriate, we're putting together the bills that we want to pass, right? I mean, I always start with my ideal. Here's what I want to do for people, right? Here's what I believe. And at the same time, we're having conversations with our Republican colleagues about what the more reasonable members of their caucus are willing to join up with us to do, and what it would take to get them on board. So as you may know, I joined the Bipartisan Problem Solvers Caucus this year because I want to be in the room where that happens. I want to be in both rooms, right? I want to be in the Democratic caucus defining our agenda, but I also want to be in that room. And I'm actually on the infrastructure subgroup or subcommittee of the Problem Solvers Caucus. We had a meeting this morning to talk about a report we're putting out that we hope could be a basis for bipartisan agreement on the infrastructure bill. But I'll tell you, it's not easy. Because, and this may sound like a partisan comment, but it's what I observe. The Republican Party in Congress is going through some strange times right now. Biden is right that the things he's proposed, including H.R. 1, are overwhelmingly bipartisan among the American people, right? So, help me think through this. If something has 80% support among the American people, how far should I go to compromise with half of the Congress that represents 20% of the American people, right? Do I split things down the middle with them in order to pass legislation? Or do I expect that something that overwhelmingly popular among Democrats and Republicans out there in real America is really the foundation of what we're going to pass, and that we're not going to do sort of lowest common denominator? And too often, some of these conversations we have, I'm going to vent to you a little bit here on bipartisanship in Congress. It's like I say I want to buy 10 flavors of ice cream, and you say no, I just want to buy 3 flavors of ice cream. And we go back and forth, and then you say, all right, Tom, we both agree on the 3. So let's just buy the 3, and then we can argue about the other 7 later, right? And you can see that's actually that's not a real compromise. It kind of sounds like one, but it's not. A real compromise would be we'd settle on 7 or 8, right? And, probably 8 when my team won the election. And so that's what I'm looking for. Like on the infrastructure bill, if we can get to something that is, 2/3 of Biden's proposal, maybe even a little less, and that fundamentally does the big things that he and I want to do, which includes all the building and fixing of traditional infrastructure, but also a real down payment on clean energy transportation, then I think we can have a deal. But it's a little hard right now, honestly, even in my Problem Solvers Caucus group, to get the folks on the other side to even talk about the clean energy stuff, because they're so afraid of being labeled Green New Dealers, right? And then on H.R. 1, I saw Joe Manchin had an op-ed in the Washington Post today, right? And he laid out kind of a, modified H.R. 1 that would be stripped of some of the more, probably the most hot button things like DC statehood, right? But that would still include campaign finance transparency, i.e. not letting billionaires buy elections secretly, and some ease of voting mandates, making voting easier for people. If he can get 10 Republican votes for that, great. I'll take it. See you at the press conference at the White House. It'll be a celebration. But I'm very skeptical he can get even 5 Republican votes for that, because the dark money stuff, like Mitch McConnell needs dark money more than a scuba diver needs oxygen. I mean, they're just really against it. And so I don't know. I mean, my attitude is I want to get caught trying. And I'm willing to accept less than what I want. But it can't be 80% or 70% less than what I want, because we won the election. And like, people voted for us because they wanted us to do these things. And I'm not going to not do them just because of an abstract ideal of bipartisanship. It's got to reflect what the popular will is right now.
I'm thrilled to hear you're in the Problem Solvers Caucus. I'm sure you'll be more of a problem solver than the other guy was. And I agree with you 100%. I want to let other people talk, but that 80%, that's all I'm asking for. And I think folks like you and Joe Manchin, and even if we don't get a single Republican vote, if you make it a better bill that'll be sustainable and that won't be under constant attack when inevitably things turn over, I'll be thrilled. And with that, I thank you so much for doing these and so much for your time.
Okay.
Thanks, John, and thanks, Tom. Next up, we have Carol from Short Hills. Carol, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Hi, Tom.
Hey, Carol.
First of all, thank you very much for all the work that you do for us in Congress. We very much appreciate it. And thank you for holding these wonderful meetings when we can talk to you. My concern today is in the infrastructure bill. We hear more and more about cyber attacks on our various systems, including the electrical grid. This could really jeopardize our national security. Is there money in this bill for that?
So there's not a bill yet. I know I probably referred to it as a bill a couple of times. What it is right now, it's a framework that the Biden administration has put out with broad categories, and they're proposing certain amounts of money for each of these categories. And you can go to their, what they put out, and it's not so general and vague that you don't know what they're doing, but it doesn't really it's not a written bill yet. Congress will now write the bill, and my committee, the Transportation Infrastructure Committee, will do all the stuff with trains and highways and electric vehicles and airports and ports. Frank Pallone, my colleague from New Jersey, chairs the Energy and Commerce Committee, and they're going to do like the electrical grid stuff. So my guess is, my hope, because I agree with you, that portion of the bill will absolutely set aside some resources and have some mandates for cybersecurity, because our electrical grid would be an obvious target, one of the most obvious targets for a determined foreign adversary trying to do us harm. And if we're going to be rebuilding and renewing things, then we need to rebuild and renew them to 21st century standards. And that's one of the most important standards that would not have been considered when most of these things were originally built.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Carol. Let's go to Matthew from Clark. Matthew, can you hear us?
Yes, thank you. So, hi, Congressman.
Hey, Matthew.
I was just wondering if you could expand on your decision to not co-sponsor HR 1976, the Medicare for All Act. Just
Sure.
seeing as how important of a piece of legislation I feel it is.
Understood. And look, that's a debate we've been having, a conversation we've been having for some time, and I've been consistent in that I'm for universal health care, and I've not signed up to Medicare for All as the means to do that. What I've signed up for is basically a Medicare buy-in, Medicare choice plan that would allow you, anybody, any age, to sign up for Medicare, to buy into the system, and as with the Affordable Care Act, with government subsidies for those who need them. The reason for that is that although many countries have single-payer systems, as you know, very few have 100% single-payer, but overwhelmingly single-payer. We have for decades had a system that's based on employment. Probably a mistake in the 1950s to set up that system in America, but it's what we have. Over 150 Americans get their health insurance through their employers. We have a large network of private health insurance companies that provide these plans that employ hundreds of thousands of Americans. And I'm not convinced that it will work to, in one leap, to jump from the system that we have to a completely single payer system. Whereas I do think that we can achieve a lot of the goals that proponents of Medicare for All hope to achieve by giving people the freedom, the choice to either stay in the current system or to choose a public option. And as I've said many times before, if proponents of Medicare for All are right, that kind of system would be significantly better for most people, then people are going to vote with their wallets and choose that. And we may naturally transition through freedom of choice, not government mandate, to where proponents of Medicare for all want us to be. So I think it's a more sensible, more viable way of achieving universal healthcare. I know many people are passionately committed to Medicare for all, and there are strong arguments that I've heard. But that's where I am now, and I think probably the only thing that's viable in our current political situation as well. So there it is.
Thank you both.
Thank you for asking.
Thank you for asking. Next up, we have Jeff from Union. Jeff, can you hear us?
Yep, I can hear you.
We can hear you.
Yep.
Hey, Jeff.
Hi. So before I start, I see the meeting's being recorded. I have to leave early, but I want to see the rest of it. Do you release the recordings of the town halls and things?
Yep, I will put a video of this on our YouTube channel in the next 24 hours. And we send out an email with all of the recordings from this month's Congress in Your Kitchen. And we will do so next week. So I will put the link to subscribe to our email list into the chat feature right now, and make sure you're subscribed to receive that recording.
Cool, thank you. All right, awesome. So I was wondering, sorry, wait, where'd you go? I wrote down my question, sorry. So I was wondering Malinowski's position on raising the minimum wage and how he thinks that Biden should move forward on the topic.
Thanks, Jeff. I support raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour. We've already done it in New Jersey, of course, right? We passed a law in New Jersey that gradually raises the minimum wage to $15 an hour. And basically what I support is a national law that is the same as what we've done in the state of New Jersey. The bottom line for me is that everybody who works in this country should earn a living wage, should earn enough money to be able to provide for their basic needs. We want to encourage work, but work should pay enough to give everybody an opportunity to move up in life and provide for their kids and to become productive tax-paying members of our economy. And the places that have done it, and I'm all for, I want to be careful and I want to study things. I don't make decisions based on faith, but the places that have done it have shown that it works out. That even for small businesses, that yes, have to pay their employees a little bit more, but also have a lot more paying customers with cash in their wallets, ready to spend in local small businesses. And so I hope we do it. It was something that a bunch of folks wanted to do as part of the American Rescue Plan, the COVID relief bill that we passed, but it was not allowed under the Senate rules because of the budget procedures that we were using to pass that bill. So we're gonna try again, and we're gonna just keep on trying until we get it done. There may even be some room for bipartisan compromise on this. I know there's a group of senators that have been talking about that, and I'm open to whatever they may come up with. Thanks for raising it.
Awesome, thank you. I was looking at the YouTube channel real quick. I didn't see yesterday's town hall. I was sure there was a protest thing, and I wanted to see it for myself. Are you not releasing that, or?
Absolutely.
Yep, we released it this morning. I put it onto the YouTube channel. I can refresh it for you and send it to you directly.
All right, thank you. That's helpful.
No problem. Next up, we have David from Short Hills. David, can you hear us?
I can. Hopefully you can hear me. I'm enjoying the beautiful weather in downtown Milburn, actually. And thank you, Congressman, for taking the time out and being as visible as you have been over the last few years.
Thank you, David.
I've lived in New Jersey for a little over 10 years, and it's a fantastic state, beautiful state. And what people tell you about, it not being friendly, I think people are fantastic. One of the things that has always concerned me, and I grew up in Texas, is giver states and taker states.
Mm-hmm.
And New Jersey's been a giver state. I think last year we gave $12 billion more to the federal government than we got back, and back to SALT and And now we talk about the infrastructure, and I know it failed. The Gateway project failed because of we would have to pick up the shortfall. I've been a little bit on a campaign. I've written you, I've written the senators, I've written, that we as a state and our congressional, both Republicans and Democrats, although I don't think they're playing the same game as the Democrats are playing, really should want to demand back every dollar put in we get back. And an example is we lost Mercedes-Benz to Georgia, and with some humongous tax benefits, and Georgia's a taker state. So we've paid twice, essentially. We lost the tax base from Mercedes, and then we lost the 12 billion, whatever percentage that we had to pay, that Georgia took out to give those big tax payments. I ran a company in Texas, and Texas also is a taker state, and doesn't insure 25% of their population. There's a whole bunch of other issues. And at the end of the day, we end up putting the bill, and now looking at taxes on, raising tax on gasoline and other things to go make up the shortfall. So I know it's been a topic, and Andrew Cuomo just recently came out against McConnell regarding that, with the blue state, red state thing during the recovery. But anything that we can do to help for making that a campaign?
Yeah. So you're totally right. We're one of the only we're one of the only states in America for which there's no federal deficit. Or at least before the crisis, there probably is now, but in the sense that we were getting less back than we send in. And some of that, you can't mandate that it's the same for every state. Like some states out west are mostly owned by the federal government because it's all national forests and national parks. Some states have a lot more military bases, so they get, a big share of the military budget is accounted for as being spent in their state. And, we're a wealthier state, right? So by definition, we're paying a little bit more in taxes, but the imbalance shouldn't be as bad as it is. And it's compounded by this really unhealthy state tax competition, where other states will slash their corporate taxes and provide a lot of tax incentives. They then don't invest in their schools and their healthcare. We then pick up the slack, as you were suggesting, through Medicaid and federal aid for education, and they steal the jobs by offering all these tax rebates. I don't know what can be done at the federal level about that. I've spoken to Governor Murphy a couple of times about, can we negotiate like an interstate compact where a bunch of states just promise, a ceasefire, that we're not going to, because, at the end of the day, like the only beneficiaries are the companies, right? They would be creating the jobs anyway, whether in New Jersey or in Texas or in Georgia. They just go where their taxes are the lowest. And overall, American taxpayers get screwed because, we individual taxpayers have to provide more, pay more in order to compensate for the lower corporate rates. So I think, some kind of interstate compact would begin to deal with that problem. On the federal level, the two biggest things I can think of, and there may be others I should be thinking about, but the two biggest things are the things we're doing right now. It's SALT, because that was, about the only benefit we got in the tax code that did disproportionately help high tax states like New Jersey, and infrastructure, because that is one item in the federal budget that meets a disproportionate New Jersey need, right? And so if we're spending a lot on infrastructure as a country by any fair formula, New Jersey, New York, densely populated northeastern states will get a lot more, and the balance, it'll get a little bit more in balance. So those are my two priorities, and they happen to, I think, square very much with what you're the concern that you're raising. If you have more ideas, I'd love to hear them.
I appreciate it. And look, I think is also the other challenge is when you hear the red state, blue state argument, or how come the blue states can't balance their budgets and things like that. I think it really just kind of infuriates
Yeah, I get very angry. I mean, I've when I hear that stuff from somebody from Kentucky or North Carolina, or you know, I just pull back the numbers. Like, dude, we are subsidizing your constituents. We are paying for their educations. We are paying for their health care. And I don't mind doing it because we're all Americans. So cut it out. And but it plays well, you know, plays well with their base in their states. And
like everything else you shared today, data doesn't really play into a lot of the discussions, right? A lot of the common sense things you talked about, as I always say, common sense not so common. Whether it's Matthew talked about healthcare, it's such a easy decision to make as you look at the numbers, but there's so much rolled up into the politics. So, but again, thank you for the time.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, David. Let's go to Judy from Milburn. Judy, can you hear us? Judy, do we have you on the line?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you for taking my question. I'd like to know if there's any effort underway in Congress to re-strengthen the Voting Rights Act so the federal government can once again push back against, obviously, Republican states that are trying to weaken voting rights. We all know the Voting Rights Act was weakened some years ago. Is there any effort underway to regain the strength the federal government once had?
Yes,
thank
absolutely. You. So that is HR 4. We passed it in the last Congress. We're going to do it again in the House. I'm sorry, we passed it in the House in the last Congress. We're going to do it again in the House this year. We haven't done it yet because the legal experts have advised us that when it eventually gets challenged in the Supreme Court again, it'll help our case to be able to show that we've held a lot of hearings, that we've conducted an investigation, that we've gathered the evidence to show that there is still voter suppression going on in a number of states in the United States. So it's something that will work through the process, through hearings, and then move through the House to the Senate. Now, that's where it gets interesting. We can get a vote in the Senate now because Mitch McConnell is no longer majority leader, so we can make every single senator vote yes or no, but we still have the filibuster. So, unless we have 60 votes, if there's no change to the filibuster, we can't do this. I think that's a tough vote for some Republicans. It's not like HR 1, which we just spoke about. This is really just straight up 1965 Voting Rights Act and making sure that it still applies in an effective way for a bunch of these states. But it's still going to be hard to get to 60 votes unless we have some change in the filibuster rules. So this brings us back to Senator Manchin, who's against changing the filibuster, who wants us to work with Republicans. We will try to do that. And if we've made a good faith effort and they're not budging, that's when I think we all have to go to Senator Manchin and say, there's got to be some change here. We can't allow 40 senators who represent maybe 20% of the American people to be able to deny large numbers of Americans a basic constitutional right. That's just it's not right. And so I think this may end with in a clash between voting rights and the filibuster sometime later this year. But we have to.
I'm sorry. Yeah. Do you, given everything that needs to be done and the pushback, can you see a scenario where all of this could happen before the midterm elections?
I think a lot can happen before the midterm elections. And in the meantime, folks are going to organize. I'm really upset about these efforts to make it harder to vote in a number of states around the country. I think they're obviously motivated by a desire to suppress the African American vote, at least in some states. But I've also seen people react to voter suppression by showing even greater determination to vote. They shouldn't have to. No one should have to wait in line in America to vote. But sometimes, for every action, there's an equal and more positive reaction. And I think we saw that in Georgia the last few cycles. People were like, "You can't take away my right to vote. If I have to wait all night, I'm gonna do it." So, look, I think the good guys are going to win this fight. Through legislative action, through the courts, and through just the power and determination of individual people to cast their ballots. So I'm optimistic that.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Thanks.
Thanks both. Next up, we have Walter from Westfield. Walter, can you hear us?
I can. Thank you, Representative Malinowski. I think you're a great representative. We're lucky to have you, and thank you for these frequent special meetings you have. My question is on immigration. I think for years, everyone in the country has agreed we have a problem. It needs to be fixed, but for years, nothing has happened. Although a few years ago, we did have a bipartisan bill that should have been voted on and might have passed, but as you know, that didn't happen. What's the chance that a good bill can be passed through the House and the Senate in the near future?
Man, I wish we could pass that bill from 2013. And that's another data point in our discussion about bipartisanship. That was a bill that was led by one of my heroes, John McCain. And it got, I think, 68 or 69 votes in the Senate. So, super majority. And the House Republicans, they were in charge of the House, never allowed a vote. Would have passed the House easily, but they never allowed a vote because they were already feeling the pressure from their Tea Party wing. And what that bill would have done was, it was a deal. It was a compromise. It was more money for border security. It was a pathway to citizenship for undocumented immigrants in the United States if they were otherwise law-abiding people willing to jump through all the hoops, and mandatory e-verify for employers. So basically, there'd be 10 million new legal workers inside the United States, and employers could hire them, but we would actually enforce the law with regard to employers hiring undocumented people from that point on. And I just I don't know how many Republicans would vote for that now. I don't think we could get 60 votes in the Senate. I mean, if it was a secret ballot, yes, but they've decided to make fear of immigration their calling card. It's the latest distraction from serious policy debate. And so I don't know if there are 10 Republicans who'd be courageous enough to vote for it, even though I'm certain there are at least 10 who believe that this is the right thing to do. So what do we do? We are going to move an immigration reform bill through the House. The version that Biden proposed does not have e-verify. I've proposed that it should have e-verify. I don't know if that will be enough to get Republicans, but I just think as a matter of principle, we should start with where the 2013 compromise was. And also, honestly, I hate the fact that when we do enforce the law against immigrants, when we deport people, we're always going after the poor families that just want to make better life for their kids, and we're never going after the factory owners that hire them, that pay for those immigrants to be here. That's wrong. So I do think it's a good bargain that, you create a pathway to citizenship, but you say from that point on, you can only hire legal people. So we'll move something in the House, and that'll be my contribution to it, at least proposing that. And and then it'll be, before the Senate. And if the filibuster's in place, I'm a little skeptical that we can do very much.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Walter. Let's go to Andrea in Union. Andrea, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Thank you so much. Thank you, Tom, and the team for doing these meetings. They're very informative, and we had great questions today. My question and comment is about, Biden extended the pause on payments for federal loan payments.
Mhm.
So I know there's been talk about the forgiveness. There's been talk of 10,000. There's been talk of 50,000, and from clients that I hear, kids in school, and they're concerned about this because, first of all, they're afraid that, the businesses are not opening, so there won't be businesses for kids. And they are carrying these loans now, and just wanted to know where you are with that. I know you were on the lower spectrum of forgiveness, but I just wanted to hear what the Congress is thinking about this. And if Biden can overrule it and say, yeah, we're going to do 50,000.
Yeah, so there's some debate about what he can do on his own authority.
I've heard that.
And so setting that aside, that's for him to decide, obviously. We do, after we do infrastructure, the next bill that, there's tons of bills that get introduced, right? But the next big package that the president wants us to consider is one that is all about investing in America's workforce. And that includes education. That includes free community college. It would include student loan reform. And when we get there, there's going to be a bunch of different options. There are different levels of forgiveness. Yes, a lot of experts, a lot of economists have suggested that that first $10,000 is the most important, that the people who are in the most vulnerable positions would benefit a lot from that. There are others who want us to do more. There are proposals to cap monthly payments as a percentage of income.
Yeah.
Similar to what we just did with the Affordable Care Act. There are proposals to basically eliminate student loan interest going forward, right? So you take out a loan, you pay it back, but it's basically an interest-free loan.
Yeah.
And, we're going to examine all of those. I haven't 100% decided where I am. I get a lot of questions about this from constituents. And so I'm kind of taking in comments and getting people's views. And when we come to it, we'll definitely do something in that bill. And again, the key question is, how can we get it all the way through to President Biden's desk? So stay tuned for that.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you both. All right, we are going to Phil in Cranford. Phil, can you hear us? Phil, do we have you on the line?
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Tom, for doing these. They're really good. I appreciate all the effort you're putting into responding to people's questions. Yeah, I'd asked about looking into statehood for both Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C. They've never had representation, and I believe D.C. has more people than at least Wyoming, maybe some other states too. And, we need them to be states for several reasons, because they don't have representation, and also would diminish the power that currently Joe Manchin has for the Democratic side of the Senate.
Yep. Well, the Joe Manchin thing is not, for me, the reason, right? He's just doing what he has every right to do, representing folks who elected him in West Virginia. But what matters to me is that every single American should have voting representation in the U.S. Congress. It makes no sense to me that we would have hundreds of thousands of Americans living in America, paying taxes in America, but they can't vote for the people who make the laws and set the tax. Just makes no sense. And Obviously, the Republicans don't want to do it because they're afraid that it would be 2 more Democratic senators. I get it. Like, we're all competitive. We all want to win elections and have the majority, but that's just not a sufficient argument to disenfranchise people. It just isn't. You know, and you know, we should have a system that gives every American the right to elect their representatives, and both parties should compete to win under fair rules. And honestly, you know, a healthy Republican Party could still easily win the majority in the U.S. Senate if we had two senators from the state of Columbia or whatever it would end up being called. So I'm for it. Puerto Rico is a little different because, you know, a lot there depends on what the people of Puerto Rico want and have wanted. I think it's now more clear than before that they would prefer statehood, which would mean they actually have to pay taxes for the same time, right? DC residents already pay taxes. Puerto Ricans do not. So, you know, that's a bargain they would have to accept as part of coming into statehood. And there again, we have the same objections, even though, interestingly, the one non-voting delegate from Puerto Rico in the House of Representatives is a Republican. So, like, that's a state that both parties can easily compete in. And I'm surprised that Republicans somehow feel they can't when they actually do elect the delegate to the House of Representatives. So that's where I stand. It was part of HR1, and we're going to vote on it separately in the House. But as you can imagine, for all the obvious partisan reasons, like that's not something that will ever get 60 votes in the Senate. So like many things we've discussed, it is wrapped up in the debate about the Senate rules.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks both. Next up, we have, sorry about that, Robin from Short Hills. Robin, can you hear us?
Yes. Hi, Congressman. Thank you for your work and for these calls.
Sure.
It's hard to believe in 2021 that there is still no equal rights amendment. I know that you recently voted to remove the arbitrary deadline for ratification, and I know that Representative Jackie Spear is making a renewed pitch to get this passed. What is it going to take to get the Equal Rights Amendment passed in 2021?
The Senate has to vote because we did it in the House. We passed the resolution that we think is sufficient to count all the states that ratified it all the way back to the 70s and the ones that recently ratified it. And the Senate would have to do the same thing. Again, it's an issue on which we have the advantage of, or Democrats have the advantage of the majority because we can put the thing to a vote and make every senator say yes or no. And at some point that will happen. Do remember that that time is a limited resource for the Congress, and particularly in the Senate. It takes, because of their rules, more time to move legislation. So we can't do 100 things at once. They can't do 100 things at once. Not an excuse, it's just the way things work. And I think there's a very strong sentiment that we needed to do COVID first. We need to do infrastructure. We need to prioritize, with the limited time that we have in these very early weeks, legislation that responds to the most immediate urgent needs of the American people. So there are things that we're going to do that we haven't done yet just because of the sequencing. We want to, lead with what's most important, most immediately important to our constituents. But that's something, like a lot of other legislation that we passed in the House, that at one point or another should get that up or down vote in the US Senate. We'll all see where our senators stand on the basic question of whether our Constitution should explicitly protect the rights of women.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Robin. Let's go to Steve from Westfield. Steve, do we have you on the line? Steve from Westfield.
Yes, I'm here.
Hey, Steve.
Hi, how are you? Representative Malinowski, I want to thank you for these kitchen chats. I want to thank you mostly for being, truthfully, a true bipartisan that's trying to do the best for every American in this country. I call today that due to the pandemic and other factors, that we're mortgaging our children, our grandchildren, our great-children's lives with costs that appear to be astronomical. I know that New York passed a bill the other day giving a lot of money to undocumented immigrants. And I'm concerned that this as well will hurt our future. I'm not against giving money away. However, when it comes to the SALT tax, which I know you're working on, and other factors that affect people's lives, how can you see this in the future to a closure that we're not going to be in debt for the rest of our grandchildren's and great-grandchildren's lives?
Yep, that's a fair question. You know, I had the honor of working for the last president who actually balanced a budget in the late 1990s, Democratic president working with the Republican Congress. And then we went on, you know, another huge spending spree, mostly military spending, and a tax cutting spree based on the illusion that if you cut taxes, somehow you'll get more revenue. Then Obama got in there, and, you know, in the middle of an economic crisis when we had to spend a lot of money, and he doggedly worked to get the deficit down. Didn't get it to zero, obviously, but did get it down over his 8 years in office. And then once again, same deal. The 2017 tax bill, which, you know, cut another $2 trillion long-term hole, or added another $2 trillion to national debt for absolutely nothing, for just a several month party on Wall Street that did nothing productive for our economy. So here we are in a moment when I think most people, certainly most economists, would agree we got to be spending. Like, this is, if we're not doing it now, we would end up in a depression for years, which would not help with the government deficit and also cause tremendous suffering amongst the American people. So I think we had to do what we have done, and I think we have to continue to do it. But we're also at a point in this debate where we have to talk about how we pay for things. So the Biden proposal, which we will have to take up and negotiate in Congress, the Biden infrastructure proposal suggests paying for those investments by a combination of raising the corporate income tax rate to 28%, which would still be 7 points lower than it was in 2017, closing a lot of corporate loopholes, and also imposing a minimum tax on foreign earnings of multinationals, because we have this problem still of big multinational companies that book their losses to their headquarters in the United States, and they book all their profits to some subsidiary and on some little island nation that charges no taxes. And like, that's ridiculous. We got to get that back. And also, by the way, invests in the IRS to make sure that corporate and wealthy individual taxpayers actually pay what they owe. We do. If you make your money from a salary, you're going to be paying what you owe, because the IRS knows what your salary is and it's withheld from your monthly paycheck. But folks of in a different category, there is a tremendous amount of tax avoidance and evasion.
Is there anything being done about, when you call a corporation, the person that picks up is in the Philippines or India half the time? And I'm getting quite unhappy that the jobs aren't here in America. We need to pay people here. I mean, that's why we're here today.
So we one thing that we definitely are going to look, as we do the tax portion of these bills, one of the big priorities is going to be making sure that there's no incentive in the tax code, at least, for either outsourcing jobs or outsourcing profits, right? One idea that I'm going to be asking our experts to consider This is sort of a very simple idea, and it's basically that every corporation, multinational, has to pay the US corporate income tax on whatever share of their earnings were earned in the United States, right? So if you're Samsung and you sell 60% of your phones in America, you're going to pay the US tax on 60% of your profits. Wherever you put your money, wherever you put your factory, you're not going to evade it. You're going to be paying tax, right? So that would eliminate that, at least one incentive for doing that. So that's something that we, for fairness sakes, and also because we want to pay for things, right? We're gonna look at. There have been some estimates just on the, actually investing in the IRS. I know it's not everybody's favorite agency of the U.S. government, but bear with me for a moment. If we have been cutting their budget for years because no one loves the IRS. The result is that, again, you and I, we pay the taxes we owe because we have to and because we're honest. But, a billionaire real estate developer, I'm not naming any names, gets away with all kinds of shenanigans. And then, Amazon pays no taxes, and come on, right? That's just wrong. And without raising anybody's taxes by a penny, it's been estimated we could recoup over $1 trillion over 10 years just by investing in the IRS. So those are some of the things that we're talking about to be fiscally responsible as we make these investments in infrastructure, which, by the way, great for the economy, create jobs, and a good economy also helps to balance the budget.
And what is your feeling on New York's decision to pay undocumented immigrants all that money?
So honestly, I just saw the headline today. So I don't know the details. I'll tell you, as I mentioned to you, I do support immigration reform that would create a pathway to citizenship for those folks. Because you know what? I want them to be taxpayers.
Sure.
They want to be taxpayers, right? Half of them actually do pay taxes, roughly, right? I want all of them paying taxes. But in the meantime, I have voted against, in the COVID bills that we've passed in Congress, I voted against providing any benefits to undocumented folks. I want to do immigration reform properly, rather than treating people who, do not have legal status as if they do. Let's get the laws right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.
All right, Marlene from Berkeley Heights. Marlene.
I can come on now. Thank you. I want to go back to the framework that you were talking about with President Biden's infrastructure. And it seems to me that, there's a lot of great things, but there's also $25 billion of things that have nothing to do with infrastructure, such as universal pre-K, tuition-free community college, and other ill-defined items. My question is, why can't we put out a bill that's strictly on one particular item, and then everybody can vote it up and down, and not adding all these pork product type of other things into the bill and muddying the waters? Because then a representative could say, well, I really like the bill, except I can't vote for it because of X. And this goes for both parties can say this. I just don't understand why a bill can't be one solid thing and not everything else in the kitchen sink included in the bill.
It's a fair question. Just one correction. Those two things that you mentioned specifically, the universal pre-K and free community college, those are not in the infrastructure bill. Those are proposed for the next bill. Remember, I said there's, the one that comes after is supposed to be investing in people, investing in the workforce and students. And so those two proposals are supposed to be in that one, not the infrastructure bill.
Okay, but there is, according to the newspapers, about $25 billion in what they call ill-defined category of funds and projects.
Right. So they're probably, by the way, so it's a huge bill, right? It's like $2 trillion.
25 billion may not sound a lot, but
I know
think
it's a lot. Right? It only
lot.
Sounds like a little because it's the overall is so much. But I agree, it's a lot. So again, these are proposals that the president has made. he's not writing the bill, we are. And, you know, I agree with you. I think we've got to go through this with a fine tooth comb. And this is where, you know, like if my Republican colleagues come to us and say, all right, Democrats, like 2 trillion, that's too much. There's some stuff in this bill that probably doesn't belong in this bill. Let's do 1.5, right? Which would be cutting $500 billion, much more than the 25 you mentioned, right? We could have a deal, I think, on that basis. And it would probably be a conversation where we look at things that are not kind of core building, constructing, putting people to work. Now, you raise a bigger question, which is why not divide it into 20 or 30 bills, right? You know, you could have a bill on water infrastructure, water pipes. You could have a bill.
I don't know whether it has to be that specific, but yes, but
Yeah, I mean,
basically.
you could. And you know what? That's where I would say it, for me personally, it doesn't matter that much. Like whatever works. I want to help people. I want to do whatever is going to deliver the most help for the economy, for the people I represent. And the rest is kind of tactics. So if you tell me we have a better shot at passing 10 separate bills than one big one, I'll do it. But it's not a matter of principle to me. If you see, it's just it's a practical question. And I think conceptually, a lot of these things are related. Let me give you one example. You know, if you dig up a road to fix the road, there's a lot of pipes and wires running underneath the road and above the road, right? So kind of doesn't make sense to do all the work and dig up the road and then 5 years later dig it up again to get at the pipes, right?
I agree.
So a lot of the stuff in the bill, and yeah, it's a big thing, a lot of, you know, it does kind of conceptually go together and pragmatically. And you're right, there are probably things that when we do our work, you know, I would probably agree with you, okay, that may not be necessary. So that's on us. We're going to have to do this in Congress.
Thank you.
Thanks for raising that.
Thanks, Marlene. Next up, we have Danielle from Summit. Danielle, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Hello, Congressman, and thanks so much for doing these. This is great.
Hi, Danielle.
First of all, I want to thank you so much for being an original co-sponsor for the carbon price and dividend legislation, both in the last Congress and then this one with Congressman Deutsch's new bill that was introduced. What do you think the chances are that we can get some Republicans to support it now that we have endorsements from like these conservative groups like the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the American Petroleum Institute, and even the Business Roundtable?
Yeah, you'd think.
You'd think.
Then again, like, as I mentioned, there are interesting things happening on the other side of my aisle. We normally think, oh, big corporations, that's like Republican. But they're kind of angry at, you know, baseball and United and like, you know, all of these woke left-wing socialist corporations that are upset about voting rights and climate change. So I don't know, I hope so. One counter example, as is often the case, is Senator Mitt Romney.
Yes.
Obviously just you know, he and I disagree on a bunch of things, but just a decent, principled, independent-minded person. And he recently came out for the idea of the carbon fee and dividend, which some people refer to as carbon tax. You know, it's the basic idea is that you put a market price on carbon, the carbon that we burn, contributing to climate change, and government takes in the money from the fee and then returns it to the American people as a dividend. So everybody gets a check, and it is actually a conservative idea. It's a Republican idea for tackling climate change without too much regulation, without government mandates, using the power of the free market to give every company in America and every consumer in America an incentive to use more clean energy. And I would love that to be the basis of a bipartisan compromise. And I think if, probably the action on this is more in the Senate, like because Romney came out with this, if some of the supporters in the Senate, like Senator Whitehouse of Rhode Island, a good friend of mine, could find a way forward with Senator Romney that might attract a few more Republicans, then we're in business. And that'd be a great way to, a great addition to the infrastructure bill, by the way. And you could do it where, 90% of the dividend comes back to Americans and 10% is invested in clean energy infrastructure to help pay for the bill as well. So there are different variations. So if there's hope, I think that's where it lies. Meanwhile, I support it and will continue to speak out for it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Danielle.
Thanks, Danielle. We still have time for a few more questions. So just a reminder, if you have a question you would like to ask Tom live, please do so by using the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. When you do so, again, include your name and the town you are from. We have a few more questions to get through, so please put those through in the chat feature. Next up, we have Richard. Richard, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Thanks, Congressman. I have a question. Is there going to be a fourth stimulus in the near future?
Probably not a fourth stimulus. So if you mean additional stimulus checks and stuff like that, that's not being planned. But we're going to have to see how things are going with COVID and the economy. My hope is there won't be a need for another huge bill like the one that we just passed, that people are going to get vaccinated, that's going to allow those businesses that are still struggling or closed to reopen, and that, in fact, we're going to have a really strong economic recovery, that we'll have boom times in the second half of this year. That's my hope. And if I'm right, then we probably won't need another stimulus. We'll be able to move on to infrastructure and building things. But if there's a need, we'll certainly consider it.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Richard. All right, this is our last questioner for today. If you have any additional questions, please use the chat feature. This is the last question we have. And it is from Peter from Short Hills.
Wow, last question. Great. Hi, Tom. Nice to see you. So I just want to go back to a question that you had a couple of persons ago, which is on deficit spending, basically, how focused Congress is. And I hear what you're talking about, what you say about trying to balance the budget or increase taxes, but sort of bigger picture, and maybe Congress punts this to the Fed, but concerns about things like the strength of the dollar, concerns of things like inflation, which could have huge impacts. All of a sudden, if inflation goes up a few percentage points, the carrying cost of the national debt skyrockets, and you can create some pretty ugly scenarios in that case. And on all the spending that we do, it's just sort of you're on a treadmill trying to keep track with inflationary issues. So how much can you and/or Congress try to balance the issues of keeping the dollar strong, keeping inflation under control, while addressing a lot of the near-term issues, which I support. I mean, I think what you've done is correct and necessary and admirable. But I am concerned, people kind of get this notion of, well, what's another $1 trillion? It's free money, and the markets so far have basically given the U.S. the benefit of the doubt. But there is a tipping point. I think that that could reverse, and I am concerned about that.
Well, I agree, and that's why I think we've reached a point where we want to keep spending, but we want to pay for the spending. So far, and I'm not a Nobel Prize winning economist, but I try to listen to them, and the consensus seems to be that we're okay. We have to be careful, but we're okay. Larry Summers, many people have heard of, wrote something a couple of months ago raising these concerns. He wasn't screaming, wasn't a fire alarm kind of thing, just like, this is something we have to take into account. And I think he's comfortable with where we are, despite that piece. But, you know, definitely raise some questions that we've been talking about. One of the great advantages that the United States has in the world is that the dollar is still the world's reserve currency, which means everyone from China to India to Saudi Arabia, you know, when they've got extra money, they're putting it in US dollars. They have confidence in the dollar, in our economy, and the choices that we're currently making. And that gives us more running room in terms of being able to borrow. So we you know, again, there's caution in my voice, right? I'm cautiously optimistic, but I do think we have to take this seriously. And so I think our immediate contribution is to take more seriously than we did with the immediate COVID relief bills, the obligation to find ways of paying for the things that we are doing.
And maybe that's another way to try to reach across the aisle, because obviously that's a lot of the rhetoric that you hear from Republicans. We can't pay for it, deficits, and maybe just even, you know, maybe it's lip service, but maybe it's a little more than lip service. Maybe you get, you know, somebody who's on the board to say, okay, at least they're taking us seriously, and I can tell my constituents that if this isn't just, you know, Washington going crazy, writing checks with no accountability.
Well, yes, and it's a conversation that we can have with them, but you know, what we need are concrete proposals. You know, and the only way to balance a budget is to either get more revenue or spend less money. And so people need to say specifically how they intend to get more revenue, or specifically what they want to cut. And we've not gotten a lot of specificity on those questions. So, you know, Democrats are in charge right now, so we have to provide it, and we're providing our own vision of what we think will work, and we'll be judged for it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. All right, we do have one more question, and we are going to go back to Walter in Westfield.
Well, again, thanks for taking me. My question is about gun control. President Biden has said he will support and sign legislation if it gets to him. Mass shootings have continued again, so we know it continues to be a problem. So the question is, what bills do you think can get through the House and the Senate that you would support?
So what we've gotten through the House is universal background checks and closing something we call the Charleston loophole. It's basically a rule that says, you know, if you walk into a gun shop and you buy a gun, they have to give the background check sufficient time to go through before they give you the gun. 3 days. And that's named after Charleston because the shooter who massacred those wonderful people in the church in Charleston several years ago, they didn't wait 3 days, and he got the gun. And had they waited 3 days, he wouldn't have gotten the gun because he would have failed the background check. So those are the two simplest things. Those are the two things that are supported by the hugest majority of Americans, like 90%. And we're going to put them to a vote in the Senate. Again, we'll see, up or down. What are you willing to do here? And you know, for me, this is just another powerful reason to have rules in the United States Senate that allow a majority of members to do what the American people want us to do. Like when 90% of Americans want Congress to act on something and agree on what we should do, and the Senate won't do it, that's a problem in our democracy, not just a public safety problem. And we've got to get past that. You know, we've done what we've done in the House. There may be more things. President Biden today talked about gun violence prevention orders, and which is another thing we've done in New Jersey that works to try to get guns, at least temporarily, out of the hands of people who are threatening harm. But at the end of the day, we need it. We will get an up or down vote in the Senate, and we either need 10 Republicans to do what 90% of the American people want, or we need to reform the filibuster in some way. Thanks.
Thank you. And the only thing you didn't mention, if I heard right, is the other thing likely to people want is an assault weapons ban. That seems to be consistently.
Yeah,
we had one for a while. For
we had
a long
one
time.
for a dozen years or so, and we had fewer mass shootings in that period. We have one in New Jersey, obviously. I'm totally for it. That may be, I don't know, 75% rather than 90%, right? Which is still pretty overwhelming.
Right.
And so, yeah, I would like to do that too.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Walter.
Thanks, Walter. All right, Tom, I'm going to kick it over to you for some closing remarks. Thank you, everyone on this call, for your participation, for all of your questions. And Tom, take it away.
Just want to say thank you for great questions, great conversation. I always get a lot out of these sessions, especially now when we're doing so much legislating, some of which actually leading to enacted laws that are helping people as we speak in all of our communities. I benefit a great deal from hearing from you about your priorities, and those then become my priorities. So thanks again for participating. We'll keep doing this. So please keep joining. I hope everyone brings 5 friends next time. This is I think the way democracy should work in America, with representatives talking to their constituents about serious issues, letting the conversation be steered by you. And I can't wait till the next time we have a chance to do it. Thanks.